All right, diving right into the deep dive today. We're going to be talking about the Arneo Toe trial of rapper Young Thug,
Mm-hmm.
a case that has really kind of captivated the music world, the legal world.
Yeah.
I mean, so many people,
Yeah.
so many different areas. You guys sent us a ton of articles about this.
Yeah.
Clearly, you are fascinated by all this. So we're going to unpack it all, from the initial charges and how the trial went to that kind of surprise ending with the guilty plea and the probation.
Yeah. I think what has fascinated so many people and what makes this case so intriguing is that it really does sit at this intersection of art, law, and even social commentary.
Yeah,
So we're asking this question like, can creative expression actually be criminal?
exactly. Yeah. To understand that question, I guess we need to start with Young Thug himself.
Right.
Real name, Jeffrey Lamar Williams. Grammy-winning rapper from Atlanta.
Mhm.
I mean, known for pushing boundaries with his music.
Right. Considered a pioneer in the industry,
Yeah.
influencing a whole generation of artists. But the prosecution in this case argued that his record label, YSL, Young Slime Life,
Mm-hmm.
was actually a front for a criminal street gang.
Whoa, wait a minute. A record label as like a cover for gang activity?
Mm-hmm.
That's wild.
Right. It sounds like something ripped from a movie.
Yeah, it really does.
But that was their argument.
Yeah.
And they built their case relying heavily on Young Thug's lyrics,
Okay.
pointing to specific verses that they said were proof of his gang involvement and even crimes.
So they were like using his art against him.
Yeah, essentially.
Man, that has got to be so controversial.
It's incredibly controversial.
Like, where do you draw the line between creative expression and something that should actually be used as evidence in a courtroom?
Yeah, where's the line?
Yeah.
And this case has thrust that question right into the spotlight.
Mm-hmm.
You know, critics say that using rap lyrics in this way really unfairly targets certain artists, especially, those who are from marginalized communities.
Mm-hmm.
And they say it ignores the artistic context, right? It ignores the context
Yeah.
and could really have a chilling effect on free speech.
It makes you think, like, if they can use rap lyrics, what's next?
Right.
Like, could novelists be on the hook for the actions of their fictional characters?
All right.
It's a wild precedent to set, I feel like.
Yeah, and, those concerns are definitely out there, and legal experts are grappling with these very questions.
Mm-hmm.
But the Young Thug case, regardless of how it turned out, has certainly opened up this conversation about what's permissible and what crosses the line.
Okay, well, let's talk about the trial itself. The articles that you sent mentioned that it was just this crazy long and complicated process.
Yeah, super long.
What can you tell us?
This was actually the longest trial in Georgia's history.
Oh, wow.
Jury selection began in January of 2023.
Okay.
But opening statements didn't even start until that November.
Oh, my gosh.
It was a year. There were multiple judges. There were constant delays. There was even almost a mistrial at one point.
Jeez.
So you could see just from that alone how high profile and complex this case was. And that's even before we get into the charges themselves.
Yeah, before we get into that, I mean, it sounds like a wild legal roller coaster.
Mm-hmm.
But before we do jump into that, I guess, were there any kind of standout moments during the trial that you think are worth highlighting?
There are a few that really show you just the twists and turns this case took.
Yeah.
One that sticks out is the testimony of Kenneth Lil Woody Copeland,
Oh, okay.
a former associate of Young Thug, and he was a key witness for the prosecution.
The classic insider turned star witness.
Exactly.
Okay, what do you have to say?
Well, initially his testimony seemed pretty damning,
Okay.
but then he actually later admitted that he had tried to kind of shift the blame onto Young Thug.
Mm-hmm.
He said he figured that the police would never go after somebody as famous as Young Thug.
Oh.
So he was kind of using him as a scapegoat.
Hold on. So a key witness admitting to potentially lying on the stand?
Mm-hmm.
That's got to throw a wrench in the prosecution's case.
Oh, absolutely. It definitely created a layer of uncertainty there, raised questions about his credibility
Yeah.
and the reliability of his whole testimony.
And you mentioned a near mistrial. What happened there?
Well, during the trial, a witness actually accidentally revealed some information to the jury that they weren't supposed to hear,
Oh, no.
which in a legal setting is a big no-no.
Yeah.
It was something about other defendants in the case being incarcerated. And so the defense immediately called for a mistrial.
So did they actually declare a mistrial?
Well, the judge ultimately decided against it.
Okay.
But it just shows you how much scrutiny every single detail of this trial was under.
Yeah.
The stakes were incredibly high.
I mean, it's hard to believe that with all this drama unfolding, that young thug ultimately ended up pleading guilty.
Yeah.
Can you walk us through how that happened?
So he pleaded guilty to 8 of the charges against him, including racketeering and gang activity,
Okay.
but not to others. It's important to note here that he did this without reaching a plea deal with the prosecution.
So no backroom deals, no negotiations,
Wow.
which means the judge had complete control over his sentence.
Exactly, and that's why the outcome is so interesting.
Mm-hmm.
He was given a 40-year sentence,
Oh, wow.
which sounds severe,
Yeah.
but the judge then commuted most of it to time served, with the remainder as probation.
Hold on. So he essentially walked free.
Essentially.
How is that even possible with such serious charges?
Well, that's where things get really unconventional.
Okay.
His probation is very strict. It's 15 years with a whole bunch of conditions like community service, giving these anti-gang presentations, and he has travel restrictions.
Okay.
And then he also has what they call a backloaded sentence of 20 years,
Uh-huh.
which kicks in if he violates any of the probation conditions.
So it's like he's walking a tightrope.
Totally.
Like one wrong move,
Yeah.
and he's facing some serious consequences.
Absolutely. It's a unique outcome, for sure. And to understand how significant it is, we need to dive into the heart of it all, which is those RICO charges.
Yeah, okay, let's do it. What exactly are RICO charges, and why were they used in this case?
Right.
The articles you sent mention racketeering, which sounds pretty intense.
Yeah, ICO stands for the Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act.
Okay.
And it's a really powerful legal tool. It's designed to target organized crime.
Mm-hmm.
And what it lets prosecutors do is go after an entire enterprise,
Right.
not just individuals,
Yeah.
by proving a pattern of this racketeering activity.
So it's not about like one single crime, it's about this systematic thing.
Yeah, exactly. A pattern of illegal activities.
Like taking down the entire operation.
Precisely.
That's-
Now, in this case, the prosecution argued that YSL, Young Thug's alleged gang,
Mhm.
was involved in a pattern of this racketeering,
Okay.
and that included things like violent crimes, murder, assault, and drug trafficking.
And that's where the whole debate about his lyrics comes back in. Right. They were using his words to prove this pattern of criminal activity.
Exactly. And that's what raises all those complex questions about artistic freedom
Yeah.
and whether rap lyrics, especially rap lyrics, can be used as evidence in court.
I mean, it feels like such a slippery slope.
Right.
If they can use rap lyrics, where do you draw the line?
Right.
You know, could a country singer who's singing about heartbreak be accused of inciting violence?
Yeah.
Or like a painter be charged with vandalism because their art depicts graffiti?
Right.
You know, it's just such a weird precedent.
Yeah, and that's exactly why this case has generated so much discussion and concern.
Mm-hmm.
It goes way beyond just Young Thug, right? It's about the potential impact on all artistic expression
Yeah.
as a whole.
So I guess let's talk more about that impact. What does this case mean for the music industry and for Young Thug's future?
Yeah, and that's what we're going to be exploring next as we kind of dive deeper into the specifics of his sentence,
Yeah.
the reactions to the verdict, and the implications of this whole thing for the music industry and beyond.
All right. Sounds good.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've established this case has like far-reaching implications, but let's bring it back to Young Thug himself. You mentioned his sentence was unconventional, a 40-year sentence, but then most of it commuted to time served
Right.
and the rest as probation. Can you like break that down a bit more for us?
Yeah, it's definitely a unique sentence. So essentially, he got credit for the time that he spent in jail waiting for the trial,
Okay.
which was about 5 years.
Uh-huh.
So that covered that initial 5-year prison sentence. And that's why he was able to walk free after pleading guilty. But the remaining 35 years weren't just like wiped away.
Right.
They were turned into this very specific type of probation
Right.
that some legal experts have said is like almost unprecedented.
You mentioned it was strict. What kind of conditions were attached to this probation?
Well, for starters, he's on probation for 15 years.
Okay.
And during that time, he has to complete 1,500 hours of community service,
Wow.
which is like 100 hours for each year of his probation. He also has to give these anti-gang and anti-gun violence presentations 4 times a year.
Wow, that's a commitment.
Yeah.
It seems like the judge was really trying to leverage his platform and his influence to make a positive impact, you know?
Absolutely. And there are also restrictions on his travel.
Okay.
He can't actually visit the Atlanta metro area for the first 10 years of his probation,
Oh, wow.
except for like specific family events.
Okay.
And he's prohibited from associating with any known gang members.
Oh, wow.
So it's like a total restructuring of his life
Yeah.
and social circle.
It's a second chance, but with like really high stakes.
Hmm.
What happens after those 15 years are up? Is he completely free and clear?
Not quite. That's where that like backloaded sentence that we were talking about comes in.
Okay.
There's still 20 years hanging over his head.
So even after the 15 years of probation, he could still end up serving prison time.
Yeah, if he violates any of the conditions during that 15 years, he has to go back and serve that remaining 20-year sentence.
Ugh.
So yeah, it's a big incentive to stay on the straight and narrow.
That's like a sword of Damocles just hanging over him, a
Mm.
constant reminder. This is a pretty dramatic departure from like the traditional sentencing that we see, especially in these high-profile cases.
Yeah.
What are some of the reasons behind this kind of unusual approach?
Oh, it's really hard to say for sure
Yeah.
what was going on in the judge's mind, but there are a few interpretations.
Okay.
Some legal experts have suggested that it could be a way to acknowledge those complexities in the case,
Right.
particularly the whole debate about using those rap lyrics as evidence.
Yeah, yeah.
It's possible that the judge recognized, it's really hard to separate art from reality,
Right.
especially in a genre like rap,
Yeah.
where, the expression often blurs those lines.
So maybe it's a way to acknowledge the fact that there's potential for injustice
Hmm.
while still holding him accountable for those actions that he did plead guilty to.
Right, it's like a middle ground.
Yeah.
A deterrent, but not completely derailing his life
Yeah,
and his career.
that makes sense. Another possibility, do you think, could be that the judge was swayed by, like, young Thug's personal circumstances?
It's possible.
He's a father, he's got a big fan base.
Yeah, he's got a huge following. He's had a significant cultural impact.
Yeah.
Maybe the judge took those factors into account and tried to come up with a sentence that was more about rehabilitation rather than just punishment.
It's definitely a more nuanced approach than we see a lot of times,
Mm-hmm.
especially in cases like this.
Right, especially when celebrities are involved.
Yeah,
It often feels like the sentences are much harsher.
right, just to make an example.
Right.
But let's not forget, there were multiple defendants in this case.
Yes, that's an important point.
Not just young Thug. What happened to everyone else?
So there were 28 defendants in total,
Okay,
and their outcomes varied a lot.
okay.
Some, like Gunna, who's another well-known rapper,
Mm-hmm.
took plea deals,
Okay.
get lighter sentences, and were released. Others got prison sentences of varying lengths.
So it really depended on their involvement?
Yeah, I mean, each case had its own set of evidence and circumstances, which ultimately affected the decisions.
So it wasn't this like one-size-fits-all situation.
Right, and I think that speaks to how complex these RICO cases are.
Yeah.
Remember, it's not just about individual actions. It's about proving that pattern
Right.
of criminal activity
Right.
within that larger organization.
Mm-hmm.
And the prosecution had to prove that each of these defendants played a role in advancing that whole criminal enterprise.
And that's where that idea of racketeering becomes so important, right? It's
Ah.
not just about a single robbery or assault. It's about showing there was this like systematic effort.
Right, a coordinated effort to commit these crimes.
Yeah.
So in this case, they argued that YSL operated like a traditional street gang with like a hierarchy, shared values and rituals,
Right.
and this history of violence and intimidation to kind of maintain control and
Yeah.
achieve their goals.
Right. But the defense was arguing that YSL was just a record label.
Right.
It was a collective of artists, not a criminal organization.
Right, just a group of creatives.
How did they try to counter those accusations of racketeering?
So they really emphasized that creative aspect of YSL.
Okay.
They said it was a platform for artists to express themselves and build their careers.
Okay.
And they pointed to the success of Young Thug and other artists who were signed to the label,
Right.
saying that their music was a reflection of their experiences,
Yeah.
not some literal depiction of criminal activity.
I mean, it's that whole art imitating life versus life imitating art debate.
Right. It's a tough line to draw.
Yeah, especially with rap music, which
Mhm.
often blends those lines.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
The defense also said that the prosecution was cherry-picking
Okay.
lyrics and social media posts out of context,
Yeah.
ignoring this larger body of work that actually showcased the artist's talents and positive contributions.
They were trying to paint a very specific picture.
Right, and they basically suggested that the prosecution was relying on stereotypes about rap music
Yeah.
and young black men to create this misleading picture of YSL.
And that brings up that question of racial bias in the criminal justice system,
Absolutely.
which is a whole other can of worms. But it's interesting how this case kind of brings all these different issues to the forefront.
Mm-hmm.
So let's talk about the reactions to the verdict. I mean, the media coverage was all over the place.
Oh, yeah.
Some outlets were saying it was like a victory for young Thug, while others were focusing on, you know, how serious the charges were.
hmm
What was your take on the reactions that you saw?
Well, it was interesting to see how divided people were.
Yeah,
Some people were almost celebratory, like highlighting that he was released from jail.
right.
They focus on the fact that he avoided a lengthy prison term
Mm-hmm.
and really emphasized the potential for him to rebuild his life and his career.
And there's a segment of the public who view him as this talented artist who may have made mistakes, but ultimately deserves a second chance. Yeah.
They see his music as social commentary,
Right.
a reflection of the realities of growing up in certain communities.
But then you had other outlets that weren't so forgiving.
Right, they focused on the severity of the charges and the guilty plea.
Yeah, that he was still found guilty, regardless of the probation.
Exactly.
Yeah,
A guilty plea is a legal admission,
right.
no matter what the sentence is.
So it wasn't just a legal interpretation, it was a social and moral perspective, too.
Yeah, some saw it as second chances, others as accountability.
Yeah, it's interesting how it all plays out.
And that's where the case becomes more than just a legal drama, right? It reflects these bigger societal debates about justice,
Right.
accountability, and the role of art in our culture.
Yeah.
It's about balancing rights with safety and recognizing the complex factors that contribute to crime.
It's clear that this is more than just a legal drama.
Mm.
It's a cultural touchstone that really brings up these important conversations about race,
Yep.
class, artistic expression, and what justice even means.
Yeah, and beyond those implications,
Yeah.
there's the question of what this means for young Thug himself.
Right. He was given a second chance, but he's definitely walking a fine line.
He has a long road ahead,
Yeah.
navigating that probation, rebuilding his life.
Yeah.
But he also has this chance to use his platform to make a positive impact,
It's a chance to turn a negative experience into a positive one
Exactly.
for himself and the community.
And that's what's so profound about this whole thing.
Yeah.
Despite everything, it's a story about choices,
Mm-hmm.
consequences, and the potential for redemption. It's
Oh.
like this reminder that we all have the power to shape our own destinies.
Yeah. And I think that's a good place to leave it for this part.
Yeah.
When we come back, we'll talk more about what his future holds, what this case means for the industry,
Mm.
and wrap up this deep dive.
Sounds good.
It's fascinating how this whole case has really sparked all this discussion about art
Hmm.
and its place in society. We've talked about, the legal stuff, but what about like the cultural side of it all?
Right. Well, I think one of the biggest questions it raises is about responsibility, right? Like the responsibilities of artists.
Mm.
Some argue they have a moral obligation to be mindful of the impact of their work.
Especially when it comes to things like violence.
Right. Violence, criminal activity.
So it's not just about staying on the right side of the law.
Mm.
It's about those social and cultural consequences of what you're creating.
Exactly. I mean, artists have these platforms that reach millions of people.
Right.
And their words, their music, their images can have a huge impact, especially on young people.
Yeah. Yeah.
And with that influence comes responsibility.
It's interesting because it goes back to that question of, does art imitate life?
Mhm.
Or does life imitate art?
Right.
Or is it some kind of weird combination of the two?
I think it's a chicken and egg situation.
Yeah.
But I think this case highlights the need for nuance, right? We can't just dismiss all rap music as promoting violence.
Right.
That's a huge oversimplification.
Exactly. There's a whole spectrum of expression in rap.
Right.
It can be a powerful tool for social commentary, raising awareness about things, challenging the status quo.
Absolutely.
It can also be a reflection of the realities that people face, even the tough stuff.
Right. Exactly.
And I mean, let's not forget about the entertainment value.
Of course.
At the end of the day, music is supposed to be enjoyed.
Mhm.
It should move us, create a shared experience.
And I think that's something that often gets lost in these legal battles, right? It's like
Yeah.
the human element, the artistic intention,
Yeah.
the connection between the artist and the fan.
Right.
Those are all part of the conversation, too.
Yeah, so considering everything we've talked about, the charges, the trial, the verdict, and the reactions, what do you think the lasting impact of all this will be?
Well, legally, it could set a precedent for how rap lyrics are used as evidence.
Oh.
And it might lead to more scrutiny of RICO laws
Yeah.
and how they're applied.
What about the broader cultural impact? Do you think it will change how artists express themselves?
It's hard to say for sure,
Yeah.
but I do think it started a dialogue about art law and social responsibility.
Yeah,
It's making us ask tough questions about expression, intent,
right.
and the role of music in our culture.
And what about young Thug himself? What do
Mm.
you think the future holds for him?
I mean, he has a long road ahead.
Yeah,
He's got that probation
right.
trying to rebuild his life and his career.
Yeah.
But he also has a chance to use this experience to make a difference.
Mm-hmm.
He could become an advocate for
Mm-hmm.
reform,
Yeah.
advocate for alternatives to gang life,
Right.
or even use his music to inspire people.
Yeah, to steer them away from the things he was accused of. It's like
Exactly.
turning this whole thing into something positive for
Mhm.
himself and for others.
It really is.
And that's kind of what's so interesting about all this.
Right.
Despite the legal battles and all the media attention, at its core,
Mm-hmm.
this is a story about choices,
Right.
mistakes, and that potential for redemption.
Absolutely.
Well said. So there you have it, folks.
Mm-hmm.
The Young Thug RICO case, a complex story that has really sparked a lot of important conversations
Yeah.
about art, law, responsibility, and so much more.
It really has.
We encourage you to keep thinking about these issues,
Mm-hmm.
keep having these discussions, and never stop questioning the world around you.
Absolutely. The more we understand, the better we can create positive change.
Well said. Thanks for joining us on the deep dive. Until next time, keep exploring.
Keep exploring.